My name is Dr. Harold Isaacs. I'm Professor Emeritus of History here. And we started this program a long time ago, and we have an excellent program this evening, and we have some dignitaries in the audience, including the president, Dr. Blanchard, and his wife Connie, right over here. Appreciate your support. And then we have a whole bunch of other people that are on the faculty. Dr. Richard Hall and Bob Harrington, and I might I've been retired 4 years, so maybe I'll forget some names. And then right in the front here, there are two close friends of mine, Kathy and Paul Zach. Kathy is the production person for the Journal of Third World Studies. She's an invaluable asset to the Third World Studies program. Paul worked about 25 years out in planes with President Carter and the Secret Service. And there's my wife Doris right there. I don't know what I'd do without her. Hello. And there's Dr. Tu right here. She's going to be the featured speaker. And right in the back are two good friends of mine, Hap and Mildred Tejan. Hap was dean here, and Mildred was the chief librarian and also associate dean of academic affairs. And they go back to my years, so I'm glad to see them here. And Phil Smedra over here to my left, great economist and frequent participant in the Third World series. And I'm not going to go into a lot of history about this because it's, well, there's a colleague of mine back, Jason Bergen, who's in political science, and he brought his class, and I appreciate all the support. So tonight's program is very interesting, and the nature and impact of third world diseases. And so our first speaker is Dr. Tu. She has an excellent background. She's an associate professor of biology here. She received her BS in chemistry from Baylor University and PhD from in medical sciences from Texas A&M. And before she came over here in 2004, she taught in Birmingham, both at UAB and Jefferson State Community College. And at UAB, she taught microbiology and developed innovative and cost-effective vaccines, and lectured to nursing and dental students. And she was also a research assistant professor at UAB between 1999 and 2004. At GSW, she teaches microbiology, biology, and advanced bacteriology. And she's a recipient of numerous awards here. Faculty Development Grant, 2 Distinguished Professor Grants, and Most Valuable Professors Award. And she's published many scholarly articles in professional peer-reviewed periodicals. And this seminar was actually her idea, and we were talking at a reception that David Garrison had at his house, and we came up with the idea back in the fall. So I asked her to be the featured speaker, and that's how the seminar happened. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce and please welcome Dr. Tu and Third World in Perspective seminar. She's going to talk about the nature and impact of third world diseases. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to address the issue of infectious disease, and Phil is going to address the issue of obesity, cancer, and heart attack. I think we have decided that. That way we complement each other and there's not going to be a lot of overlap and it won't put you to sleep also. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is discuss the various types of infectious disease and how it confronts the third world country, what impact they have on the third world country and the global community. All right. So what are the most common killer in terms of infectious disease? All right, you know infectious disease are the leading cause of death. All right, so I have a list here of different types of infectious disease, and hopefully people over there can see it. Malaria, tuberculosis, hepatitis, HIV, which you all know, it stands for human immunodeficiency virus, and AIDS stands for acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Cholera, filariasis, helminthiasis, both of these are parasitic worms. Okay, trypanosomiasis is, you know, the common African sleeping sickness, also Chagas disease. It's caused by a protozoan. Yellow fever, dengue fever, and measles are associated with viral infection. And of course, the respiratory infection, there's all kinds of respiratory infection, and the common one that you just heard, or the most recent scare that we have, is the H1N1 influenza. All right? And a couple of years ago, you remember the restriction on traveling to China and other Asian countries was due to the SARS virus. Again, that SARS stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome. Okay, so there are all kinds of influenza out there, and again, if there is a concern that it might be a pandemic problem. Can you hear me, or do I need to talk into this? I'm pretty clear, because I didn't realize I have to talk into that thing, okay? All right, so the first infectious disease I'm going to talk about is malaria. All right, there's 350,000 to 500 million cases of malaria that occurs worldwide. All right, and each year there's about 2.5 million people that will die from this, and mostly it involves young children. And they are located in the sub-Saharan region or in Africa. Okay, the malaria is transmitted through bites of the female Anopheles mosquito. Okay, and there are 4 parasites that are associated with this disease. The mosquito serves as a vector. It is important for the life cycle of these parasites, and those parasites are listed there, and I'm going to try to say the name. Hopefully some of you have heard of it. It's a protozoan. It's Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium ovale, and Plasmodium malaria. The first 2 are the most pathogenic. That means that they are more disease-causing than the other 2 strains. Okay. Now, malaria is commonly found in tropical and subtropical regions. The reason for that is because the warmer climate, the warmer temperature, is important for the life cycle of the development of the parasite within the mosquitoes. All right, and you got to remember, some of these regions, the humidity is high also, and it's also important for the development of the population of mosquito in these regions. All right. Now, a person who is infected with malaria, they could be asymptomatic. That means they could walk around healthy. And they have found that some people can actually have an acquired immune response to it, so that means that they can walk around, and then if they can survive, and by the time they get 7 to 10, nothing can affect them. They seem to be acquiring some sort of immune response. They can live with it. It's not going to kill them. Other people will have the traditional symptom: chill, fever, sweating, headaches, anemia, and it could lead to kidney failure and also death. Okay? All right, this is just a map showing the distribution of malaria, and hopefully if we all know our map, and I've learned something from doing this, and again, not everybody can have their geography down. All right, so you can see here, this is Africa here. Most of that region, the region in blue means that there's a prevalence of malaria in those regions. So you can see it here in Africa, in South America, in Brazil, and some of the warmer countries like here, down here in Mexico, Costa Rica, and over here you got India, China, and some of the warmer region here. There's more prevalence of malaria in those regions. All right, so what are some of the tools to fight malaria? One of the things that you hear about on the news all the time is insecticide-treated bed nets. These things cost about $5 a piece. All right, but you got to remember, these people are living. Some of them are living for on an average of $1 per day. All right, so it's very poor country. So even a $5 bed net is something difficult for them to get. All right, so if you hear about them in the news and they're asking for contribution to these places, again, is to provide these resources to these people to help to protect them from malaria. Okay. Another thing that needs to be done by the government is insecticide. You got to have effective insecticide to kill off the mosquito. Again, they can develop resistant to the insecticide. And then, of course, there's all kinds of anti-malaria drugs, quinine, chloroquine, primaquine, all these different types of anti-malaria drugs that will be useful for these in terms of treating this infectious disease. All right, so here they're showing a picture of a child, a young child, sleeping under an insecticide-treated bed net. And they found that in those countries that have these kind of resources, you can reduce the infant mortality by 20% for children under 5 years old. So it's truly effective, okay? All right, another disease, a common disease that you hear about all the time also is tuberculosis. All right, tuberculosis is one of the world's deadliest diseases, and again, it's not just found in third world countries, it's also in industrialized nations. But here, because of our infrastructure, our healthcare system, resources are readily available, it's under control. You don't see as much you do still have a problem, but it's not as much a problem, it's more control. All right? Whereas in poor country, because they don't have the resources, 1/3 of the world's population are infected with TB. 9 million people around the world become sick with TB each year, and out those 2 million people will die from TB-related death. All right, so what caused TB? All right, TB is caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. All right, this microorganism will attack the lungs and other parts of the body, in this case, brain, spine, kidney. Okay, what is a mode of transmission? It's by sneezing, coughing, speaking, talking. All right, if TB is not treated, it can be fatal. All right, and it's also been found that TB is the leading killer of people who are HIV infected. In fact, there's a lot of people who are HIV infected, and again, they're intravenous drug user, so they're now are co-infected with TB. And again, if you remember, TB is a bacterium, HIV is a virus. If your immune system is down, again, actually tuberculosis can be full-blown then, because again, your immune system is compromised. All right, so they have found that there also in these countries, the problem with resistance to TB drugs can occur when these drugs are misused or mismanaged. Okay, and there's two types of resistance, and they call them MDR and XDR, and I'll explain that in a second. How do people cause these problems? One is because the patient do not complete their full course of treatment. Okay, so if the doctor gives you antibiotic and you're supposed to take it for, let's say, a month or so, if somebody is forgetful, they decide, okay, I'm feeling better, I'm going to quit. All right, that can give them microorganism a chance to become resistant to the antibiotic. All right, if it's wrongly diagnosed and you give the antibiotic, wrong treatment or wrong dosage, not enough, again, it will not kill the microbe. All right, if there's a limited supply of the drug, that is also a problem. Okay, and if the drugs are available but are not of good quality, that is also a problem. Okay, so what are MDR and XDR? Again, in industrialized nation, hopefully these are rare. Okay, it's under control. MDR stands for multi-drug resistant. Okay, so these microorganisms, these mycobacterium, will be resistant to maybe a couple of antibiotics, 2 to 3. All right, just a few. All right. Now, the XDR stands for extensive drug resistant. That means they're going to be resistant to a whole panel of antibiotics. Now, this is going to be more of a concern to the global community, because then if you run out of antibiotic, that person's infected, and if that person infects someone else, what are we going to do for an antibiotic, because now we're running out of antibiotics? Okay, and again, it's not just Mycobacterium tuberculosis. There could be other types of organisms now. You hear about it all the time in the news. It's MRSA. methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And again, it's a common thing that you find, again, in the hospital, okay, infection, right? It's pretty much a truly a public health problem now, okay? Another type of infectious disease this is a common one, and again, you all know about it pretty much. Should be a review, is the HIV or AIDS virus, okay? HIV, again, as I said, is human immunodeficiency virus. AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It is the last stage of HIV where your immune system is completely knocked out, and the person who has it will actually be more susceptible to all kinds of infection, and opportunistic pathogen will have a chance to establish an infection, all right, because your immune system is no longer any good. All right. Over the past 27 years, nearly 25 million people have died from AIDS. All right. It is a debilitating illness. It can cause premature death in people in their prime years of life. All right. It can devastate families and communities, and I'm going to talk to you more about that in a few minutes. All right. And also, it will complicate the nation's effort to fight poverty, to improve health, and to promote economic development. Okay. And it is estimated that HIV and tuberculosis will account for the overwhelming majority of death in developing countries by the year 2020. All right, this is just to show you, again, it's just a picture of the HIV virus right there. And again, you were taking micro, so I could go more about it, but not for this class, this purpose here. All right, how is this organism transmitted? Where are they found? HIV is primarily found in the blood, the semen, and vaginal fluid of an infected person. All right, and HIV can be transmitted through many different ways. By having sex with someone who is HIV infected, by sharing needle and syringe with someone infected with HIV, which again is another way for TB to come into play, all right, or by being exposed, for example, the fetus, to HIV before or during birth or through breastfeeding. Another one that was not put on here is also through blood transfusion. Again, in industrialized nation, there's more monitoring in terms of the blood sources. All right, but again, in these developing countries, maybe the resources not there to monitor the blood supply. So again, you can actually get infected by blood transfusion, and even in this country, you have that problem. Okay. All right, so what are the impacts? What is the impact of AIDS? Okay, here are some. Okay, AIDS would diminish a person's ability to support, work, and provide for his or for her family. All right, so if the person is sick, they are unable to work. Their income level will be much lower. That will increase their poverty level in the community. Okay, again, they have to get treatment, so they have to travel. Depends where they are, all right, to the clinic to get treatment. Again, that will increase the cost, the health cost, all right, and they have to get drugs to make sure that they stabilize the disease or try to prevent or cure the disease. All right, so again, that will decrease the household income. Female are more at high risk for infection, and again, if the female is providing for the family and she is unable to work, the family will also be affected. Okay, children can actually be affected themselves. They can directly either get the disease themselves, or actually they could lose one or both of their parents to the disease. Okay, and if the child is sick, they're not going to be able to go to school, and again, their education will be affected. And again, we have a bunch of students or children that are uneducated and poor that can lead to a lot of implications. Okay. And some of these, they have immediate family taking care of another member of the family, or you could have extended family, cousins and other people taking care. But HIV is such a prevalent problem now, all right, that even the extended family are starting to get sick. All right, so then you got all the family members getting sick, so who would take care of whom? All right, again, it would strain the resources of the community. The hospital will have to deal with the number of patients, the huge amount of patients in some of these countries. Social services, again, you already know about the schools, all right, and businesses. Businesses actually will get a huge hit too because it's amazing because they have statistics where they show in Kenya, businesses will actually lose, or the employee will actually vacate their job, not because they're retiring like, in some of these countries, but they would vacate their job or or leave their job because they're dying or they're sick. So for every person that is vacating their job, they have to have 3 more people that retrain or rehire. And again, you don't know one of those 3 people or 2 of those 3 people may have the disease. So then again, productivity for business will go down. They're not going to have enough workers to crank out whatever. Profit will go down. Health insurance costs will go up. So it's like a domino effect. When you have something like this, it'll affect somebody, something else, and it's just like boom, boom, boom all the way down. Okay? This is the International Crisis Group Report, to show what are the impacts of AIDS. So AIDS is a personal security issue. You already know that from what I told you. It will affect the person's well-being, health. It'll affect their personal income, the family unit. AIDS is an economic security issue because, again, they found that in some countries where AIDS is so prevalent that there's a decrease in productivity, the labor productivity, so the gross domestic product will actually decrease. So that means the country's not cranking out as much product as it should. So that means that other countries that rely on this country for those products will be impacted. So that means there's going to be less export because you don't have enough goods to go out, but yet you still have those huge needs within the country like drugs and all things that's needed for the healthcare system, so there'll be increased import, but less export. Again, you have less people working. So again, if you guys remember, this is tax season. The government needs your money. If there are less people working, there are less tax. There's not enough income there to tax, so the government budget will go down. That will affect how the government operates, and we should all know, in this economy. AIDS is also a national security issue. Because again, they found that AIDS it will affect everyone. The police forces, the military forces, everyone in general. And if these military forces who are actually in charge of security, if they are weakened, then there are more chances of getting internal and external conflict, riot within the nation. So it's a huge impact, and that's what I've learned from this information, is that it's not just a public health issue. It's a national issue, and it's an international issue, which is the last part there. AIDS is an international issue. Why is that? Because again, when these countries, when the people in these countries are sick, they're not going to be involved with other countries, the G8 or any other nation, in terms of solving international crisis. So again, it is now an international issue. So AIDS actually impacted, and again, you can say that about probably, I would say AIDS is the one that actually get the report on, but I would say that if you look at it, some of the other infectious diseases will have the same impact. So here, this is again a table. Again, this was obtained in 1999, and I was trying to get to see if they have anything a little bit more recent. But if you look at the data there, all those are countries in Africa, and so what you see here is that Uganda, when these countries are affected by AIDS, there's a huge number of orphans. So if you look at Uganda, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Tanzania, you got over 1 million orphans. And you can already see that right now, even though it's not the same situation with Haiti that's going with the earthquake. There's a lot of people that are children that are orphaned. Again, that is a problem, because where are those children are going to go? Who's going to raise these children? And again, they're going to be raised, if they don't have enough money, uneducated and in poverty. Now why is that? Why do we care? Besides the fact that you have human compassion for someone else, the reason why is because when these children are uneducated and they're in poverty, they're going to grow up into an environment where it will be a good recruiting ground for corrupted military leaders. And if you think about Saddam Hussein and the Taliban and all these different situations, 9/11 and the terrorist attack, where do they recruit people? It's usually people that are poor, they're uneducated, They are trying to find a purpose, and this is a perfect place to brainwash them. Okay, so again, it is now a national security, it's a global crisis, all kinds of problems, and not just one place. Okay, and this number right here, at the time I get it, they were predicting that number was going to triple. So I would love to know what the number is now. Okay, now I do realize that we have gotten, technology has gotten better, and we have gotten better in terms of antiviral drug, and also there are more people living with AIDS today than ever before. You may not die immediately, you can live for years on end. But again, I would love to know the number that they have. And again, there's not, since these are developing countries, there's not, sometimes they don't collect data on a frequent basis. When I went to look at all these information, to research the information for it, there's tons of information from the CDC on the United States. When you try to look at information and data for developing countries, it's pretty much down to not much. Okay, so that explains why. Again, and there again, investment and all that should be done because we have the money. Why would they invest drugs and all kinds of investment in countries that are not going to get much from it? Okay. Life expectancy is going to be decreased also. So if you look at here, again, there's a whole bunch here. This is a percentage of adult with HIV or AIDS. So here it is. If you see Namibia, is the prevalence rate there is about 20%. All right. So if you're not, this is a hypothetical. All right. So if without AIDS, you're expected to live to about 67. All right. If you have AIDS, your life expectancy is about 42. So that's a decrease of 26 years. Now you got to remember, look at this chart. You got to remember that this is probably not just AIDS alone, but it's exacerbated by the fact that these countries do not have. They suffer from malnutrition. They're suffering from clean water. There's no clean water or lack of clean water. So there are other factors that makes it even worse. All right, but AIDS definitely has an impact. Okay, if you look it down through here, of course, the life expectancy decrease for all these other countries here. All right. Again, this is, you already know about the increase in infant mortality. And if you look at here, it goes anywhere from, with Malawi is 16%, all the way to Botswana is 121% increase in infant mortality. That is incredible. That's a huge number. All right, so how do you prevent HIV? All right, of course, it's education. All right, letting people know how to prevent it. All right, and they focus on what is called the ABC method. A stands for abstinence. All right, B will be faithful to your partner or be monogamous. And C for consistent and correct usage of condom. Okay, and it's important that this is actually, education is very important to prevent this problem. All right, now that's HIV, but there are other types of reproductive tract infection that's not discussed. And again, the data to collect for these is going to be few, because why? Some of these, some countries, even though they know about the issue, is not a lot of research done on it or a lot of effort put into it because they consider reproductive tract infection not as fatal. Okay? It's not going to kill you. So therefore, or at least then that's the case. So they're not going to invest a lot of effort into it. But the World Health Organization, that's what WHO stands for, World Health Organization, if you're talking about globally, and if you're talking about in the United States, is the CDC, Center for Disease Control. Estimate that 200 million women will have RTI or reproductive tract infection in developing countries. All right, and out of those 200 million, 3 to 5 million women are seropositive for HIV. That means they have in their serum detection of the presence of the AIDS virus. All right, million have unsafe abortion. All right, when they say unsafe or illegal abortion, or what they call leftover abortion. So these females will go get abortion and it's not done properly in an unsanitary condition. Then they end up with other kinds of issues, other kinds of infection. Okay, lack of prenatal, delivery, and postnatal services. Half a million of women die of pregnancy-related cause, again, infection. Okay, so again, as I said, the RTI will receive low priority in most developing countries. All right, so here are some data, not specifically reproductive tract infection, but I found this is for other cases of STD or sexually transmitted disease. All right, and so if you look at it, how much it would cost per case, all right, in U.S. dollar for these cases. So here there's 4 different types of STD: syphilis, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and chancroid. All right, so to go get the drugs, it's pretty cheap actually compared to what we pay in this country. All right, drug costs in U.S. dollar, at least at that time, is in 80 cents, so it's less than about $1 or less. All right, to go to the clinic is, look how cheap that is. Okay, so you can treat a case for $1 or less. Okay, so it's pretty downright cheap, which it has to be if you live on $1 per day. I can't even live on $5 a day here. All right, so and in terms of treatment effectiveness, it's pretty effective. All right, now this is what they call in some of these cases what I call clinical diagnosis. That means if you walk in, we don't have to do much testing. We're just going to look at your symptom and can say, well, I think you got this. All right, it's easy. It's cheap, don't have to do much screening, don't have to do much testing, and so I can, but the problem is it's not sensitive, it is not specific. I won't know exactly what you got unless I test your blood or I do additional tests. I won't know exactly what you have, but I can give you some drug to help solve your problem. All right, so it's cheap and easy. Okay, so there's more a tendency, if you look at this chart, all right, where some of these countries would decide, well, we can either treat everyone, and it's cheap. It doesn't matter what you got, as long as you're close enough, the symptom will give you some drugs. All right? And so if you notice the cost, it's only $1,000. Okay? Now, if I decide to do additional tests, like up here, serology, look at your blood serum to see if you have that specific organism, then the cost is going to go up. All right? It's pretty effective, but still, the cost is going to go up if you do additional testing. It's like in this country when you have x-ray done or any other test done, it's going to cost you. Nothing in life is free. All right? Then, down here with chlamydia, here's clinical, again, diagnosis is pretty cheap. All right? You treat everyone, it's pretty cheap. If you decide to look to see, let's say you have a sample and you come in sick and they decide to culture the organism, that means they're going to take a sample of whatever you got and put it and see if they can grow the organism and see what is it that you got. The cost is going to go up. If you decide to look for some component of that organism, that's what antigen is. It's some component of the microorganism that is being recognized by the immune system. All right? So that's what antigen is. You're looking for that, the cost is going to go up. So why not? And some of these, all right, so you notice if you're just doing clinical, it's not very effective here. All right? So the tendency is to say, well, why can't we just go ahead and just treat everyone, just give them drugs because it's cheap. It treats most people overall as relatively effective, and it saves us some money. Well, there's a problem with that logic. If you give everybody drug, there's a side effect for the woman and the fetus, right? Or for those people. There's a side effect of these drugs. Also, if you give everyone the drug arbitrarily, the microorganism will develop resistance to the drug. All right? And if you treat everybody the same way, then you're not going to know if they're infected with syphilis, if they're infected with gonorrhea, what is the STD that they're stuck with or they're coming down with. So then you can't notify the partner, like what you would hear in this country if somebody had HIV, you would say, well, who have you come in contact with? I would go ahead and make sure that we know, or you should go and notify those people to make sure that they are going to get screening to make sure that they are not coming down with the same thing. All right? Well, so there's a lack of partner notification because you won't know what specific disease they have contracted. Okay? So those are the disadvantage of you just treating everyone. Okay? All right, so now let's go back to the impact. What is the cost to the individual? All right, so again, some of these are, you've heard me say, there's a cost of buying drug. Okay, there's a cost for traveling to get treatment. All right, there's loss of days of work, absenteeism. All right, the loss of income for the family. All right, if it's children, it's absence from school. Again, it'll affect the education. If they die, there's a cost of burial. Okay, and of course there's loss of family members because these are family members will help take care of other family members. If something happened to one family member, and then what would happen if the other person needs help? Okay, what is the cost of the government? The government have to maintain these health facilities to make sure that these patients are taken care of. And there will be a huge healthcare cost. That's what you see in this country. They have to make sure that there's a good supply or a huge amount of supply of drugs. Again, for these patients. There must be public health intervention. And if we're talking about those vector-borne diseases, and there's more than just malaria, there's other types of vector-borne diseases, and I have a chart if you want to see it. Again, to prevent this from spreading, you have to do, for example, in case of malaria, insecticide spraying to make sure that you kill off the mosquito. You have to make sure there's enough supply of bed nets so that other people aren't going to get infected. Other children are not going to die. So there's a constant process here to make sure that this is not going to be getting worse and worse and worse. In terms of the government, there's a loss of income. As I told you, if these countries there's a huge number of people getting infected, they're not going to be able to work. The gross domestic product will go down. So that means, again, a decrease in export. And if there's a huge problem, there's an increase in import. So decreased productivity, decreased GDP. Okay. Again, loss of opportunity for joint economic venture and tourism. If you already seen it with Haiti, it's not, well, infectious disease will be the next step in line. Okay, because again, those people are malnourished. Malnutrition, lack of water, and with all the dead bodies going on right now, they're expecting there's going to be all kinds of dysentery, typhoid, and all that. And of course, you already heard about the gangrene and the dust and all that. With all the infection, it's going to set in, and a lot of people are getting infected, and things that are preventable. But again, because there's no lack of resources, we're not even able to control these problems. And of course, Haiti, like anything else, if you look at that situation, there's a lot of correlation if you see this and then you look at Haiti. Because again, it is starting to grow, it's starting to have investment contribution in those countries. There's a lot of companies that are thinking of moving there, but now it's in a shambles. So again, because of that, companies are going to start leaving. Same thing here. If your country is got full of sick people, you're not going to have a lot of productivity. Investment venture is going to go away. It's going to go somewhere else. So again, why is that important? It's going to impede the nation's economic growth. So because of that. Again, this is summarizing what I just told you before, and this was published by the ICG group, the International Crisis Group, on the global impact. So you already know about these, as I mentioned it already: reduce labor supply, reduce labor productivity, reduce export, increase import. Again, there will be more problems with, again, poverty, increase in crimes, increase in conflict, armed conflict within the country, internal and external conflict. Global security will be an issue. Of course, if, like again, we can go back to Haiti. When there's increased poverty, malnutrition, you're going to have increased human migration. So those people are going to start leaving that country and go somewhere else. Now, how does that affect other countries? Again, that's something else to look into. A huge amount of orphans. It threatens the social and economic progress, affects the police and civil service capability, and peacekeeping operation. So there is also evidence that infectious disease may have a consequence for global security and play a role in the pathogenesis of armed conflict. So maybe these countries that have high rate of infant mortality and high rate of infectious disease, that could lead to a nation with higher armed conflict. And I'm going to show you where the evidence is by this next one. All right, so if you look here, all right, these dots show that these are nations that are engaged in armed conflict. Here, here, here. All right, and of course, you look down here, there's 3 shades of purple, pink, whatever. All right, color. All right, lighter, darker, purple. Okay, so what happens here is this is greater than 150 per thousand cases of, in terms of under 5 childhood mortality rate. All right, this is again tuberculosis incident, and this is HIV prevalent. So as you can see there, the dot where there's nation with armed conflict overlap with those that has these incident of either TB, prevalence of increased child mortality rate, and HIV. So it seems to imply that there is a correlation between these two, okay? All right, so what are some of the obstacles that hinder prevention and treatment intervention? All right, it's a lack of funding. All right, there are government agency and non-government agency, NGO, that you hear about in the news all the time. All right, there are grant funding, but they're short-lived. They're only for one time or two times, and they're not a continuous funding. All right, and in that ICG report, Kofi Annan was actually suggesting, the Secretary of State at the time, was suggesting that the G8 nation would put in at that time. We do, the United States, contribute quite a bit to that also. But they said instead of a one-time thing, what you should do is all these industrialized nations should put in maybe $1 billion each year into a pot, so that may be a $10 billion pot of money, to help in terms of these global issues, global infectious disease. And that will set that money and make sure that annually this money is coming in and it's going to help to support these programs and making sure that these incidents will actually decrease. Okay? There is a need for a stronger health care system in these countries. All right? And if you look at Haiti and you look at the news, you should know that for every 1,000 people in Haiti, they were saying there are 3 doctors. Okay? For every 1,000, there are 3 doctors. All right, so we need a lot of healthcare workers, medical supply, testing and counseling service to make sure that there's a good infrastructure for these programs to continue. All right, and of course, you want to make sure that the HIV/AIDS program or any other program, all right, have to make sure that they overlap well with other services so that there's not inefficiency and overlap, and the money is used wisely. All right. There's a stigma of AIDS. All right, there's discrimination and stigma of AIDS. So sometimes the patient will have AIDS and they will not be screened because they don't want people to know that they have AIDS. All right, and of course, another hindrance to this is the price of the drug. Antiretroviral drugs are very expensive, even in this country. All right, so and these people do not have that type of money. So in order for this to impact AIDS, you have to be able to come up with drugs that are at much cheaper cost, right, and is accessible to these people in the developing country. Okay. All right. So, what are some of the future directions? All right, and we can go. And right now, there's a lot of genome sequencing of all these microorganisms. So the DNA sequence of all these microorganisms are known. What advantageous, even the human genome has been sequenced. What good is that going to be? Hopefully that by looking at the DNA sequence of these microorganisms, we can come up with better vaccine, better drug target. All right? So that means that maybe there's a component of the microorganism, all right, that is recognized well by the immune system. Okay, so we can use that as a vaccine. Okay, and you already know about every year when we have the flu virus and you go out and get the flu shot, they always are doing everything to improve that cocktail. All right, so you're not just getting an injection of maybe one virus, you're actually getting a cocktail, a mixture of different types of virus strain in there. All right, and you're hoping, and actually that may be very beneficial because the immune system may be able to recognize all those different types of microorganisms and form an immune response to it, which is better. Okay, so that's what they call an acquired immune response, a natural acquired immune response. So you notice with H1N1, if you're older, you're less susceptible than people who are younger, 50 years old or less. The reason for that is because you have been exposed to the virus before, your immune system already recognized the virus. So now when it comes back, even though it's a different types of virus, your immune system already recognized some component of previous virus. So somehow that would generate some sort of immune response to protect the older people. Young people, children, and they're elderly people because their immune system is not fully efficient. But young people who have not been exposed to these viruses are actually going to be more susceptible because their immune system will be new to it. All right, so again, there will be more damage. All right, drug company and biotech company must work harder to come up with vaccine and drug development. Okay, again, we may need to have what I call new and rapid diagnostic tests available. So that means the test should be done quickly. If somebody comes into the office, maybe it's like now, you could actually do an HIV test, and I think you can actually do an HIV test at home. All right, now the problem with that is, again, the ethical dilemma there. If you do an HIV test at home, you find out you got HIV, then you sit there and what are you going to do? All right, so there should be counseling of some sort. All right, if you find out. So again, there must be new and rapid diagnostic tests that are cheap. All right, that are cheap, because remember before we were talking about it's not so cheap to do these diagnostic tests. You must have better or improve the distribution of resources among the developing nation. And of course, it's important to remember that developing countries with all these diseases are where the genomic science can make the biggest impact. Okay, so it's really, really important that we continue to do all this. Right? And so it's not just industrialized countries that need it, but the impact of the developing country on other nations are also important. Okay, and before I close, I want to tell a joke, and I hope I don't kill it, because Dr. Harrington told me this, and I thought it's relevant to what we discuss here. And let's see if I can get this straight, and if I kill it, please don't laugh. Or laugh anyway, because that was the whole point of the joke before I killed it. He was telling me that there is a patient who goes into the doctor's office and he's not feeling so good. And he said, go ahead, please, give me something. And the doctor said, well, I don't know what you got, so I really can't give it to you until I do more tests. And he said, well, that's not necessary. I take my dog to the vet, and he just look at the dog and he just give him some medicine. So the guy said, okay. So the doctor said, okay, here's some drug. And he said, that's it? And he said, yeah. But if the drug doesn't work, we're going to have to put you to sleep. And we have Dr. Harrington to thank for that, and he's the one who told me that. And I thought with this rapid testing here is perfect ending to this story. But that's it, and if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll be glad to answer it.
We're going to wait for the questions till after Phil's
Okay,
through,
all right,
okay?
that's fine.
And then we'll do it. Thanks. Our respondent is Dr. Smedra, Associate Professor of Economics here. He got his BA from Penn State University and his MS and PhD from University of Georgia. And then he started working for the Department of Agriculture, and he was in the Peace Corps in Morocco. And he's on the board of editors of the Journal of Third World Studies, and also the board of directors of the Georgia Consortium. And he's very active in the Studies Abroad program here and around the university system. And he was director of our program, Maymester program in Bulgaria, which Dr. Hall and some other faculty members participated in last summer. And he's a frequent participant in the Third World series. So please join me in welcoming once again Dr. Philip Smedra.
I'd like to thank Dr. Isaacs for continuing to produce these programs, even years after he's retired. I think it gives faculty a chance to talk about their expertise and provide a bit of information to students and other faculty. And let's see, what am I doing here? Here we go. I was thinking about how to start this program, and I thought the best way to start the program would be, and understand that even though this is a response to Dr. Tu's presentation, the way she described it, she talked about infectious diseases, and I'll talk about chronic illness, which is something that I've been interested in actually for the past 15 years, since working overseas and realizing that both chronic and infectious diseases are a significant public health problem. Most of the money and the expertise, medical expertise, goes toward, in the developing world, goes toward addressing the problem of infectious disease. And so I thought that I would kind of devote my research to chronic illness. And chronic illness more and more is becoming a disease of the developing world, as well as malaria and HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis. But things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes, things that we folks in the developed world fall sick with and die, are now becoming a bigger and bigger problem in the developing world. And so that kind of caught my interest in, actually 7 years ago, I began doing research on diabetes, actually something called non-communicable diseases, NCDs, including diabetes and heart disease. And my first research was in the South Pacific, because I had lived there for 4 years, taught at the University of the South Pacific. And there are some significant problems with diabetes in some of these island nations, in particular Nauru. Fiji has a big problem. 25% of its adult population is diabetic. In comparison, in the United States, about 6% of the population is diabetic in the U.S. Between 18 and 20 million people are diabetic in the U.S. In some of these countries in the South Pacific, like Nauru and like Kiribati and like Fiji, 25 to 40% of the population is diabetic. And when you visit these places, and I've had the good fortune to both visit and live in a number of these island nations, it's very evident. These people, the young people, people who are in their 20s and in their 30s, look sick. And in fact, they are sick. So the issue here is more and more these illnesses that were considered to be illnesses of the developed world are now becoming more and more common in the developing world, in low income, in middle income countries. And the United Nations, for our information here, because I'll be talking about low income and middle income countries, low income countries are considered those countries that have per capita gross domestic products, that is GDP, the total value of goods and services divided by the population. So if a country has a per capita GDP of less than $975, that's considered a low income country. Between $975 and $3,800, that's considered to be a lower middle income country. And between $3,800 and $12,000, that's considered to be an upper middle income country. And then above $12,000, that's a high income country. So in the US, by comparison, our per capita GDP is about $45,000 per capita. So there are a lot of countries that are included in the high income country that we would consider to be developing countries. So chronic illness has become one of the developing world's most important problems. People who study public health call this transition a mortality transition, because countries that are developing typically have problems with infectious diseases, and as they develop, as the problem of infectious diseases is minimized, then people fall sick and they die of the same kind of diseases that people in the developing world do. In some of these countries, in some of these developing countries, non-communicable diseases, NCDs, have reached epidemic proportions. And here are some data from some of the countries that I've both lived in and visited. In Nauru, as I mentioned, this is a one-island country, 3 miles across, 4 miles long, right on the equator, west of Kiribati, what used to be called the Gilbert Islands, and east of Papua New Guinea. 40% of the adult population is diabetic. In Fiji, 25% of the adult population is diabetic, and 10% of the Kiribati, which is what the people on Kiribati call themselves, the Kiribati, are diabetic. 20% of males on Nauru and Kiribati die due to non-communicable diseases before the age of 40. Cardiovascular disease affects a good percentage of females on Kiribati. This is a picture of one of the ministers in government on the island of Kiribati, a picture that I took while I was in Kiribati teaching at the center. This woman is actually suffering from what's called Hansen's disease, which you would know as leprosy. which is an infectious disease. Most chronic conditions are the result of, as we know, diet and physical inactivity, a big issue in the developed world. Poor nations in the past had suffered from things that Dr. Tu talked about: malaria, tuberculosis, measles, cholera, Hansen's disease. And the United Nations has focused its resources, and there have been many, many organizations that have focused on infectious diseases in the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. And this is essentially the 10 commandments of poverty reduction that the United Nations put in place in the year 2000, which is why it's called Millennium Development Goals. The concentration is on infectious disease, because that is, again, what resources are going toward. And one of the reasons why resources are directed toward infectious diseases is because of the United Nations concentration on infectious diseases. Chronic disease, the things that I've been interested in, aren't part of the UN's Universal Framework for Development, and that has to change. Here's some data about, this is 2005 data, total deaths in the world. 58 million people in 2005 died of these different things. 2/3 of the deaths, this is both the developed and the developing world, 2/3 of the deaths in the world in 2005 were the result of chronic illness. 1/3 infectious illness, and then another 10% from injuries. So chronic illness in both the developing and the developed world is a significant problem. 35 million people in 2005 died from chronic illness, which is twice as much as infectious illness. Some more statistics. In low-income countries, and again I define that as countries with a per capita GDP of less than $975, infectious diseases still kill more people than chronic illness. But notice that in every other classification, lower middle, upper middle, and high, chronic illness is the principal killer of people. This is what, again, the WHO, the World Health Organization, which is part of the United Nations, this is what their predictions are up until the year 2015, that chronic illness will be the principal killer of individuals throughout the world, both in lower middle, upper middle, and high income countries. 80% of all deaths in China are from chronic illness, and that's the case all over the world. You can pretty much pick a country, except for the Sahel, some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where still infectious diseases is a bigger killer than chronic illnesses. Chronic illness is more deadly in the developing world because of what Dr. Tu talked about. There simply isn't an infrastructure. Countries don't have the resources. They may have a clinic, but there aren't any medicines in that clinic. So people, when they fall sick, they don't have any recourse. There simply are no facilities, the kind of facilities that we're accustomed to. If you've got a chest pain, then you're taken care of right away. You're the first person that's seen in an emergency room if you come in complaining of chest pain. Well, if you've got chest pain in a developing country, and if in fact it's a cardiac issue and not just a kind of a pulled muscle, you'll probably die of that heart attack because there's simply no quick means to get assistance to those individuals. Death rates from heart disease in men over 30 have fallen by half in rich countries. They've increased in the developing world, which is an indication that chronic illness is becoming more and more important. So poor countries suffer this double burden, this burden of infectious disease, which is still a significant problem, and this growing problem of chronic illness. 12 million deaths from chronic illness in 2005 in low-income countries. Again, about the same as communicable diseases. Again, I mentioned that Africa is a special case because of its, and when we're talking about Africa, we're not talking about North Africa, the essentially Arab countries, the Maghreb, or Southern Africa. We're talking about the Sahel, countries like Chad and Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali and Sudan, also Ethiopia and Somalia. It's the only continent that has more deaths from infectious diseases than it does from chronic illness. And that's because of this continued to be rampant HIV AIDS epidemic. Problems with providing clean water to the population. And unfortunately, the Sahel is doomed to hot, dry weather, which many times depletes the ability of farmers to have access to water, which destroys crops, which sets up all kinds of health issues for these individuals. They become, their level of health is diminished. They become susceptible to all kinds of illnesses, infectious diseases. So people in poor countries, they contract chronic illness at a younger age. Again, in most developing countries, there is no means to help these individuals. And that, as Dr. Tu mentioned, affects productivity. You can go to work, but if you're feeling sick, you're not going to be very productive. And whether you have HIV or whether you have diabetes or you're suffering from some kind of heart disease, you're not going to be very productive, which diminishes the ability of a country to grow, which is what we've been hoping the developing world would do since the 1960s, since the mass independence movement throughout Africa and throughout the rest of the world, when the colonial powers allowed these countries to be independent. It's been 50 years. And in some countries, we've seen tremendous progress, and in other countries, not so much. So, when you've got the family member that is chronically ill, many times those families will spend their entire savings, if they have any, in order for these individuals to have treatment, if in fact they have access to treatment. So the irony is, you've got developing countries suffering from rich world illnesses more than the rich world suffers from rich world illnesses. Again, we have modalities, we have recourse. You get sick, you go to the hospital, you go to a doctor, and you get treatment. These folks get sick, and more they're getting sick with the same kind of illnesses that we're falling sick with, and they don't have those options. So people in the developing world are in fact living longer because this war on infectious diseases has been pretty much successful. Life expectancy in lower and middle income countries has risen from 50 years in 1965, which wasn't all that long ago, to 65. So over a span of 40 years, life expectancy has increased tremendously, and that's because of the successful combat of infectious diseases. In the poorest countries, life expectancy has also increased because, again, of this successful war on infectious illness. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which you've all heard about, $30 billion to combat illness in the developing world, that focuses on infectious disease. And as this says, financing for malaria control. And the Gates Foundation is concentrated on controlling malaria. Has increased tenfold over the past 10 or 12 years. Now, the factors that contribute to chronic illness, well, here's a fellow who's been smoking for a while, and it's affected his complexion, apparently. And also probably the wind and the cold weather of Tibet or northeastern or northwestern China. So people are living longer, and they're falling ill from the illnesses that we fall ill with when we become older. Smoking, alcohol consumption, unhealthy diet. You've heard of, for those of you over here, this is a very, very cute picture. You've heard of the Marlboro Man, this is the Marlboro Babe. And here's a kid who's puffing on a cigarette, and how old is this kid? A year maybe? So he must really like his tobacco. 300 million Chinese men smoke, the population of the United States, and that's setting China up for huge public health issues in the years to come. The same is true all over the developing world. Tobacco is a huge, huge problem. Not even so much as a public health problem. It's a financial problem. You've got people in these countries, China, Russia, Indonesia, Egypt, spending 5 and 6% of their household income on cigarettes, which is an issue. So tobacco consumption is increasing in the developing world while it decreases in the developed world. Obesity, another huge, huge problem. The definition of obesity, a definitive definition is a body mass index of greater than 30. And body mass index is simply height over weight. It's a ratio. But a very easy way to determine whether you in fact are obese is 30 pounds above your ideal weight. That's considered to be obese. In the United States, about 30% of the population is obese, considered to be obese. 60% is overweight, which means your normal weight up to about 30 pounds overweight. There's an epidemic of obesity. Again, Russian households contain at least one obese person. The problem is, in the South Pacific, again, a region of the world that I know very well, heavy people are considered to be prosperous people. Heavy females are considered to be much, much more attractive than what we would consider to be an attractive female, that is, someone who is slim. So there's these cultural issues that people in public health in these countries have to deal with. You know, a huge woman is considered to be tremendously attractive. And, you know, the wallflowers, the people that don't get asked to dance, are the people that we would consider to be of normal weight. Here's a little emperor. Because of China's one-child policy, 20% of Chinese urban children are obese. And this little fellow is doing a good job to maintain his weight. Obesity among children is becoming a much more unmanageable problem. This was unheard of just a generation ago, 20 years ago. Obese, middle-income country children. They didn't exist. But now they are existing. China is considered to be a low middle-income country. That is, per capita income between $1,000 and about $4,000. And more of these kids are becoming obese. This is setting up this country for a huge, besides its smoking problem, a huge public health problem in the future. Most countries aren't prepared to deal with chronic illness. They're all set up to deal with infectious diseases. And that's, as this point says, that's probably due to the focus of charitable organizations, aid agencies that are coming into the country and directing their aid monies and aid resources on infectious illness. And there's a reason for that. One of them is bureaucratic inertia. I mean, you've got an established bureaucracy, health bureaucracy, that's focused on controlling malaria and tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS now in Africa. And very few people are really all that concerned about chronic illness, non-communicable illness. And the reason for that is, again, you've got a bureaucracy, but more important, it's very easy to treat infectious disease. I mean, you can point to somebody who's got malaria, and it's very easy to set up inoculation campaigns or provide bed nets to people to prevent their mosquitoes from biting, or to do tuberculosis testing. It's very easy to convince people that they should come for inoculations, pretty easy. Whereas when you're talking about chronic illness, you're talking about changing lifestyles, changing how people perceive food and how people perceive their body image. Again, in the Pacific, it's going to take a whole lot of effort to convince those people that large people aren't very attractive. These are two women on a bike in Nauru. A picture that I took when I was there a few years ago. And these women are considered to be, and they are attractive, but something that probably would not hit the runways in Paris. But it's considered to be very attractive in Nauru. These are also Nauruans. So what are needed, and just a couple more minutes and we're done here, more education, because a lot of people in the developing world don't realize that eating certain foods is bad for you. In the South Pacific, the New Zealanders that produce 60 million sheep every year, there are about 3 million people that live in New Zealand, there are 60 million sheep. If you go there and travel around, the hillsides look like they've been snowed upon, but actually it's sheep. And the New Zealanders and nobody else in the world likes the fatty part of the sheep, what are called lamb flaps. Lamb flaps, that's the fatty part of the belly. And so what the New Zealanders do after they slaughter the sheep and market the desirable parts, they take the lamb flaps and put them in cans and they export them to the entire South Pacific. And so a delicacy is fried lamb flaps, kind of their Spam. But you can buy Spam there also. And this is, people lick their chops for this. Yum, yum. Fried lamb flaps. And so people don't realize that this stuff is, it's a heart attack waiting to happen. So better education, public official demonstrations of healthy living. Back in the 1980s, the King of Tonga, who was very famous for his size, he was a 400-pounder or more, 450-pounder. And he decided that he was going to start living a healthier life. He was going to lose some weight. And he did. He lost like 100 pounds, which got him down from about 420 down to 320, which caused the people of Tonga to go on a countrywide diet, and they lost thousands of tons of weight. Those of you who are a little older know about the King of Tonga. I mean, this made the world news. And he's since passed away just a few years ago at the age of 88 and got a little bit heavier, and so the people of Tonga also got a little bit heavier. We've kind of forgotten about that. Sponsoring active lifestyle events. When I was in Nauru, I was invited by the Ministry of Health to participate in a race, a foot race. They asked me if I ran, I said yes. And I asked how far was the race, and they said they didn't know. It was just, here's the start and here's the finish. And it turned out to be an 8K race, about a 5-mile race. And 2,000 people showed up for the race. And so, I raced and came in 6th, as a matter of fact. Of course, everybody else was 6 years old. And that's the problem. I beat 1,994 6-year-olds. That's who is racing. That's where the effort is concentrated on children. So more physical education programs for adults are needed all over the world. Once people get out of high school, that's essentially it as far as physical education goes. Sponsoring active lifestyle events. So what needs to happen is better education. People need to realize the consequences of their decisions. The consequences of eating fatty foods. The consequences of living a sedentary lifestyle. Once we impose those kinds of, well, we don't want to impose, but once we provide that kind of education, we can allow these people to live longer and not die from the same kind of things that we die of. That's that. Good, thank you.
Okay, well, those are 2 excellent presentations now. I think there must be some questions with all the information that has been dispensed tonight. There must be 100 people here, and there's not one. Well, I have a question. No one mentioned yellow fever. What about yellow fever? Because I went to an African country a couple of months ago, and I had to go to a lot of trouble to get a yellow fever vaccination. So
I think that's also, I don't know a lot of details about it. Again, it's a virus associated, and I think you have to, it's got a vector also. Not sure if it's a mosquito or different types of insect. Again, it's mostly in tropical country,
Yeah.
so, and I don't know in terms of the prevalence of how high that's going to be, but if it's anything kind of like malaria, it will be pretty
yeah.
big.
Okay, yes, ma'am, Miss Atkins.
You didn't mention polio either. I'm
Polio.
going to be traveling in the next month.
Yeah, to
and
India.
it has been suggested to take polio.
Right, actually, they did mention polio, but I have the list of many of the diseases are on there. Again, that's viral associated, but I figure with so many infectious diseases, I just want to give you a little bit of each kind. And so, but no, yes, I agree with you. Polio is also an issue. Measles, polio, all those.
Are they coming back again, or is it staying steady? Or are there breakouts in certain regions, and why?
I think with some of these, there's a vaccine, all right, but like in here, like with measles and some of these area here in Dutch, because I think, with the vaccination, it helps it to go away, but there's occasional, what you call flare-ups or, cases of it, and actually, if that is the case, and usually if they're looking at infectious disease, usually they'll jump in and start doing vaccination again to keep it under control. But there are random cases where it goes up and down, so you just have to be, I guess, if it's in the United States, the CDC would really have to look into that and make sure that it's regulated. If it's out in another country or somewhere else, then the World Health Organization have to make sure that that is going to be under control.
Where are you going?
India.
India.
It is an issue in India.
Yeah.
I've gone through malaria, polio, typhoid, A&D.
Especially among them.
Just in case.
Are there any? Yes, ma'am.
Because tonight we talk about the issues in the third world. So I want to know the exact definition about the third world.
Well, I have to go back. It's the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, mostly.
So do these countries have the special features?
Yes, most of them have a lot in common, even though some are different. For instance, some nations that were third world advanced, like in Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, North Korea. But this has been a big issue. Should these areas be named third world? Because there are differences. There are, but there are a lot of commonalities. And for instance, they're all colonial areas. They were once ruled by European nations. They have high population growth rates, high birth rates, high amount of disease, a lot of poverty, a lot of dependence on developed nations for their economies. Most of them are in debt, things like that. The way the term originated was back in 1952 when a French demographer compared the newly emerging colonial nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to the Third Estate in France, which was also an aspiring group, a revolutionary group. They felt left out, and they were diverse too. And then it became known as the non-aligned countries. In other words, you had the U.S. and Europe and Japan and so forth, and that was the first world, and then the Soviet countries, Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, second world, and then there were a group of nations, specifically in Asia, Africa, Latin America, that didn't align themselves with either group. They consider themselves independent. They call themselves non-aligned. And then it became an economic term, so there it was political and it became economic. Now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of questions arose because the Second World collapsed. But no better term has emerged. You can have, underdeveloped nations. That wouldn't be exactly accurate. You can have the South. So people still use third world. And there are people that don't like it because, it has connotations to them of inferiority and things of that nature. But for lack of a better term, it continues. Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I was just wondering, how do groups that do go into other countries, how do they approach the situation? Like, how do they assess how the problem is? Like, do they assess it from the perspective of a Western perspective, or do they assess it from the perspective of how the nation and the people themselves would assess the situation?
You talking about development?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's been one of the problems is I didn't plan on being part of this, but that's been one of the problems. It's like an old one-size-fits-all type of thing, and we've been accused of doing that in these countries. And friends of mine that do research and advise African countries and even European countries feel that the program should be developed by the communities themselves, and they should be adapted to the conditions in those communities because they're so different. And the people should be involved as stakeholders in the development process. And maybe there'll be more progress. Huh?
I think it would be more successful.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it works, but if they incorporated the people within that country to educate their own people,
Yep.
so it wouldn't seem, I guess, as if somebody else is trying to help them.
Right. Probably be more successful if they would do that. And there are projects that do that. But, there needs to be more progress in that area. Phil, you got anything to say about that?
Well, actually, there had been a great many complaints about top-down, telling people how to arrange their institutions, and it was found that it didn't work. And many organizations, both NGOs and governmental organizations that are involved in development now, do exactly what you're describing. They go to communities and ask them what they need, and then they make sure that the community has a stake in the development of whatever they've asked for, whether it's building a well and maintaining it, or building a clinic and making sure that it's staffed, and the people that they're sending off to high school and medical school, that they come back. And so the entire notion of development since the 1960s has turned around from top down to kind of bottom up, and it's more effective if in fact that's the way things operate.
Are there any other questions? We're going to have a program I just learned about today, third world program on, we're going to have a professor here from Ghana, Dr. Buor, Daniel Buor, who's at the Kwame Nkrumah State University in Ghana. And he's going to be visiting the week of February 8th through the 12th. And we're going to have a third world seminar featuring him about what's contemporary developments in Ghana on February 10th. So we just found out about that today. And then we're going to have a program on U.S. policy on March 24th. It's also a Wednesday. U.S. policy toward Pakistan and Afghanistan. And Dr. Parkinson and Dr. Brian Smith and Dr. Hall will be the featured speakers at that. So we got a full semester of programs. And we hope that you'll be there, and we thank you for your presence this evening. And thank the speakers for an excellent program.